Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Good to have you here. Welcome to another episode of Love and Abuse, and I want to remind you that all information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek the advice of a professional for your mental health and well-being. And I think that's especially true for today's episode because I have some responses that you can give someone who might be emotionally abusing you or controlling you or trying to manipulate you. And I had somebody reach out and they asked the question, what kind of responses can I have for someone who's trying to make me feel crazy, trying to abuse me, trying to control me? I'm talking about specifically today gaslighting and crazymaking. And if you're not familiar with those terms, let me give you an example. And I chuckle a little bit because it's just a ridiculous example, but I read it. It apparently is true. At least people do this. So I want to share it with you. And that was the story of this woman. She was married to a man that was causing her to feel confused and crazy. And one of the many things that he did was he changed the silverware drawer. He moved it to another position in the kitchen. And so it could have been like the junk drawer. So he swapped the junk drawer and the silverware drawer. Let's just say that's what he did. And so she came home one day and she was going to make something to eat. She reached for the silverware and it wasn't there. And she got confused. And she asked her husband, "Where is the silverware?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "What do you mean? What do I mean? The silverware was always here." And he said, "No, it wasn't. It's always been there." And, I'm sure the conversation ensued from there, making her feel completely confused. But that is crazymaking. That is one of the more major examples. There are worse examples, unfortunately, but the idea that you can confuse someone to put them in what I might consider a disempowered state. It makes them doubt themselves. It makes them feel insecure. They don't trust their own decision making and their perceptions. They're having trouble trying to figure out if their perceptions are correct. So this is what can happen in a crazy-making situation. If there's someone in a relationship that is causing this confusion, this crazy-making, what do? I mean, stuff like that may be hard to respond to. I mean, that is possible to get confused. Like, well, maybe I'm wrong. That's what happens, is that the victim of the crazy-making asks themselves, what if I'm wrong? What if he or she is right and it has always been there? I've made mistakes before, so perhaps it has always been there. And then you'll start to find little justifications for that. Like, well, I guess, I would have probably reached for the fork or the knife in this drawer because this is where I prepare the food. So maybe it was here this whole time. What was I thinking? And this is where the self-doubt continues to creep in and continues to be reinforced, giving the crazy maker what they want, which is you in that disempowered state. And as long as you're there, you will feel a little bit more dependent on the manipulative person. You'll feel like you have to rely on them more because maybe your brain isn't something you can rely on as much anymore. So you're so glad to have this other person in your life to help you sort the confusion out, become more organized. So that's just one of the many things that can happen with crazymaking, one of the many behaviors that you'll see. And unfortunately, people do this. I mean, there's just no way around it. People want to have some sort of control over you, and they know that confusing you is a way to do that. I mean, the people that we're talking about today, the crazy makers, the gaslighters. So in a nutshell, that is crazy making. It's making you feel crazy, little by little. Unfortunately, it is the compound effect of these little behaviors that someone else can do that will cause you to slowly feel disempowerment and this craziness. And as long as you're continuing to move in that disempowering direction, they will keep their control. And something I'm going to talk about today, which is dominance over you, also known as a power over model. They have power over you, and as long as they keep that power over you, they stay in control and they get what they want. And getting what they want isn't always pleasant for you. So we don't want that to happen, or if it's already happening, I want to give you some tools. So today is sort of like a tool day. I want to give you some tools. Now, let me say this before I give you any of these tools. Realize that some people might get angry. And if you're with someone that you know is possibly aggressive or even physically harmful, you may not want to do these things. I mean, this is something you have to realize, that when the controller loses control, or they think they're losing control, they're going to reach even deeper to gain control. They're going to look inside their tool bag and find something else that gets their control back, because them being in control of you is a way they feel control in their life. So imagine if you take their control away, they feel like they're no longer in control. And, some of these people, we'll just call them control freaks. They don't want to feel that way and would rather have it the same way it's always been, with you under their control, you being submissive or dependent, or whatever position you're in with them. So when they feel a threat of a loss of control, they can become more aggressive. Now, you have to make that decision, and of course, only take these, like I said in the beginning, as informational and educational, and talk to a professional if you plan on using these things, because I don't know what can happen when you start standing up for yourself. Hopefully, you know the person well enough where you can stand up for yourself and they are okay with it. Typically, people that listen to this show have people in their life that when they stand up to them, they're not okay with it. So I just want to throw out that little disclaimer. You're going to know your situation best. You're going to know the person that I'm talking about in your life best. So just take that information for how I intend it, to keep you safe, to keep you okay, so that you don't get into any harm. And so let me just start with saying the first thing that you need to recognize when crazy making is starting is that you're going to feel some sort of emotional drain. And this is typically at the beginning of a conversation, or the beginning of the manipulative person's process or pattern to make you feel crazy or confused. So I want you to start recognizing exactly when the emotional drain starts. And it will be something that you'll notice. And if you are not noticing it, I want you to start noticing. And I want you to notice at what point it happens. Is it a look that the person gives you? Is it something they say? Is it the inflection in their voice? Is it the way they're standing? Is it the way they have their hands, or their, to a lesser extent, their legs or their feet? Are they sitting? Are they talking on the phone? I mean, these are all minor, probably benign things, but it can be helpful to you to recognize exactly when the drain starts by being very aware of their body language and their verbal and nonverbal cues. Because once you're aware, then you can start to notice the pattern and when it starts, and also what follows. So if they give you that look and you feel that drain, that's when you note it to yourself, like, oh, he or she just gave me that look. I'm having that emotional drain right now. So this is the beginning of it. I want you to catch the beginning of it. And it may take some effort. It may take a lot of repeat observations until you catch it. But I want you to catch it, because this pattern leads to the crazy making, or making you feel less empowered and less secure inside yourself, and less confident in your abilities, and less decisive. So what you're doing is you're catching the pattern before it puts you into that downward spiral, so that you don't get stuck in those patterns. It may still happen. You may still get stuck, but being aware of when it starts gives you a lot more information than you had and gives you a good start. Plus, when you feel the drain, it's nice to kind of step outside that drain and be the observer. So you're starting to feel this drain and you go, wait, I'm feeling this drain. Okay, Paul said this helps you step outside your emotional space and get into that logical space, that analytical space, which can be very helpful. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment too. But you're in this logical, analytical space now, being the observer, asking yourself, okay, what exactly happened to get me here? So just start with that. I mean, recognize that you're falling into a different state of mind. And that state of mind is confusion. So even if you don't feel the emotional drain, I want you to look for the confusion. I want you to be aware of when it starts, because the confusion is often the start of something I'm going to call a state of suggestibility. When you start to get confused, you become more suggestible. And, thankfully I have a hypnosis background. I learned how to be a hypnotist, and I was a hypnotist for several years. And that taught me a lot about the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind becomes more suggestible, which means it's open to suggestion when it's in a confused state. A good example of that is the stage hypnotist. They are a different breed. They do it for fun and they do it for laughs, and they're on stage. But you'll notice some of the things they do, if you really pay attention, are meant to confuse the person up there. They get like, what did you just do? Or what did you just say? And in that moment of confusion is a trance-like state. When you're in that trance-like state, you are open to suggestion. What suggestions come into your mind at that point is what defines what happens next. So on stage, people are getting on stage. They know they're going to have some laughs and it's all in good fun. That suggestion might be you're going to sing like Madonna, and they start singing and they don't sing like Madonna, or whatever. But in a real hypnosis session, a confusion state is helpful to suggest things that might be positive to your life. But in an emotionally abusive relationship, that suggestible state, you know what I'm going to say. When you're in that entranced state of mind, that state of confusion, disempowering statements can be made. Toxic statements can be made. And because you're more suggestible when you're confused, those toxic statements can land inside you at a deep level. So if somebody says something like, you're not a good mother, you're not a good father, you're a terrible person, if they say something that makes you feel bad about yourself, it might land if you are in that confused state, because you are more suggestible in that confused state. So if you're open to suggestion, you might take false comments about who you are at your core as truth. So I want you to be aware of that too. Just because you're in a confused state doesn't mean you can't negate these when they happen. Like you can say, oh, he or she just said something that they want me to feel that it's truth. And since I'm in this confused state, I have to be careful not to accept that as truth. And that's hard to do because the confused state is often accompanied by overwhelm. And when you're in confusion and overwhelm, what is the one thing that you want? The one thing you want is clarity. You want to get out of the confusion. You want organization. You want someone to pull you back to safety or something, or you just want to get back to a state of mind that is free of the confusion. The problem that happens in the emotionally abusive relationship is that that state of confusion is not only planted by a manipulative person, but they also do you the favor of pulling you out of it too by suggesting things to you, by feeding things to you, and helping you get to a clear space by their design, in their construct, meaning they will structure a clear place for you that is a level of their control so that you stay in control, but it seems like clarity to you. What does that mean? That sounded confusing, actually, when I'm saying it. It sounds confusing, but what's happening is the person that puts you in the confused state and then takes you out of that confused state becomes not only the abuser, but also the supporter. This is trauma bonding. If you've not heard me talk about trauma bonding, it is the reason I named this show Love and Abuse. It is when you equate abuse and love as the same thing, because the person abusing you is also appearing to love you as well. And now you feel this attachment to them, but it's got a toxic element to it. So every time you love them, you think abuse is part of loving them, and you feel this draw toward them. And you want to show them more love and attention because you think you're not showing them enough because you must be doing something wrong and you're believing all these false things about yourself. So you try to show up in a better way and they eat it up. They know that you're in this back and forth state of feeling hurt and then feeling loved and then feeling hurt and then feeling loved. And they are putting you in that place and then taking you out of that place. And so that trauma bonding is really a powerful way to keep you in a space of confusion and at the same time in a space of feeling very connected to the person who is also confusing you. And they're also controlling you. And they also are causing you to feel bad about yourself. And it's a terrible space to be in. And if you're not aware of it when it's happening and how it happens, you get sucked into it easily. Because once you fall in love, if it's a romantic relationship, it's hard to break that love when they show it when they're a good person. And when they're not a good person, they're doing bad behavior, you're looking for justification for that bad behavior, and you take some of the blame. You start to believe that you're doing something wrong, so you try even harder. Trauma bonding is something that, if you're not aware of it, look it up and make sure that you are aware of it, because people that get stuck in these relationships, they feel like they're not going to get the amount of love and support from anyone else because they're so convinced that the love and support they're getting now is like the best ever, when it's really not. So be aware of that term and the cycle of support and love and control and abuse that can happen in that mixed up and down of the relationship is almost always emotional abuse. And if you're not in a romantic relationship, this can also happen in family and friends and things like that, when somebody has control over you using the same process. I mean, there's many ways to be emotionally abusive. And if you've not heard this show before, my definition for emotional abuse is when somebody makes you feel bad and when somebody makes you feel bad about yourself. So it's like an intentional thing, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes emotional abuse is not intentional. There are many emotional abusers that listen to this show. They want to learn how to stop being emotionally abusive. So it's good to know that sometimes emotional abuse is not intentional, and as long as the emotional abuser has empathy and they're able to access that empathy and they're able to say, gee, when I'm that way, I hurt that person. So if I was that person that I'm hurting, how does that feel? And then their empathy kicks in and hopefully they'll stop doing that behavior. It's sometimes not that easy, but that is the very first big step that needs to be taken, and getting to that step might be hard for some people. So there are the intentional conscious abusers, and then what I call the unconscious abusers, which are the ones that don't know they're doing it and aren't looking to change, and maybe don't even care that they're doing it. Those are the unconscious, unempathetic abusers, and there's not much you can do for those people. If they don't have empathy, they don't care. So we have to be really careful about those people as well. But let me get back to what I was talking about, and that is the responses. So the very first thing, when you feel that drain, when you feel that confusion, if it's starting, then you want to make a note like, oh, it's happening. This is it. This is your state of suggestibility. The second thing is remembering that your compassion will often assist you in getting into that confused state. So as you're getting into this confused state, if you have compassion for the person talking to you in that moment, I mean, yes, you probably have compassion for people in general and that person, of course, but in that moment, do you have compassion for them because you feel they are a victim of some sort? Because if you do, if the drain is starting and the confusion is starting and your compassion kicks in, you're going to get sucked in. You're going to get sucked right into that continuous state of suggestibility, and it's going to affect you. So I want you to be aware that your compassion can often assist you getting even more confused, because what happens is you start to doubt that you're actually compassionate. You may start to doubt that you're being a compassionate person, even though you're compassionate almost every other moment of your life. You have compassion. But if you start to doubt that compassion, that's when the confusion can take place. And the manipulator is very good at convincing you that you're not compassionate or you're not being compassionate. And maybe they're even playing the victim, which activates your compassion. So be careful about that. And also take the following to heart. You are either a compassionate person or not. Let me say that again. You're either a compassionate person or not. What that means is that if you doubt your compassion in a moment of time, then that is something that you are being convinced to doubt. You're either compassionate or you're not. You either have it in you or you don't. You don't have to think your entire identity is suddenly crumbling in that moment. You just have to believe that you are a compassionate person. So if you're already a compassionate person, it's already in you. It's already innate. And because of that, you don't suddenly become not compassionate. I want that to sink in. And the reason is because if you're ever convinced that you're not being compassionate, remind yourself, no, wait, I am compassionate. I'm a compassionate person. So my compassion is not the problem. Just be aware of that, because if you start to become compassionate toward an abusive person that is playing the victim, then what happens is that you get sucked into that state of suggestibility because your emotions take over, and now you feel bad for the person, or you feel bad that you think you're doing something wrong. No, your compassion is either innate or it's not. And if it's not, let's just say that you don't feel like you have compassion. Well, you might have to work on that. You might have to work on feeling compassion, but not for the abusive person. Not yet. Because you have to test it in other places. You have to test it with other people and maybe animals and who knows, the earth, whatever. Whatever your values are, you follow those. And do you find that you're a compassionate person in general? Because if you are, then you are in this relationship as well with the other person. So don't bring your compassion into question. Just know it. Just know it. The next thing that happens after the confusion and you're aware of your compassion is that your insecurity will kick in. And I've already kind of covered this a little bit, is that you start to believe that they may be right. And when you start to believe that they may be right about what they're saying about you, those false comments that they're saying about you, and you start feeling insecure, I want you to tell yourself, I can be insecure later. This is not the time. I need you to stop the pattern. This is all about stopping the pattern. You recognize the drain. You recognize the confusion starting. You recognize maybe your compassion's kicking in, which activates your emotions, which sucks you into this more suggestible state. I mean, if it hasn't already started. And now you have insecurity. Well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe he or she is right about me. It doesn't matter. Be insecure later. I know it's easy to say. I get it. But I just want to plant these seeds to blossom when you need them, because you need to stop the pattern before it spirals out of control and makes you believe that you're broken or doing something wrong. You need to understand that when you start to go into these states of mind, that you become more suggestible and you become more submissive and you become more controlled. And we don't want that. We want to make sure that they can't necessarily get under our skin. We want to make sure that we stay empowered. This is all about keeping your power. So remember that part, is that when you start to feel insecure, just say, stop. I can feel insecure later. I mean, you say this in your mind. I'll feel insecure later. I'll deal with this later. But right now, I need to be secure in myself. And that can be hard to do. I mean, if you're already kind of insecure or a lot insecure, and you're already in a relationship that has really worn you out, then it's hard to access that. So don't beat yourself up if you can't access that. These are a bunch of tools, and maybe you can only access one of them, but this is all a work in progress, so give yourself credit. Now, the next thing is fear. A fear may kick in, and insecurity is probably based on a fear. So what is the fear about? What are you afraid of? And that's a great question to ask yourself, is what exactly am I afraid of? Maybe they're starting to talk to you and you feel the drain, and you know that you're starting to get into that confused state or a manipulated state or controlled state. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? You might have some real fears, but I want you to be aware of what they are, because some of us walk around with fears that we haven't defined. Like, he might yell at me or she might fire me. Okay, you can define that fear, but why are you afraid of that? Why are you afraid of being yelled at? Why are you afraid of being fired? Why are you afraid that they might think you're stupid? Why are you afraid that you might be unlovable? These might be dumb questions, but I want you to be really clear of why you're afraid of them. I've told this story before. I don't know if it was on this show or my other show, The Overwhelmed Brain, but in my 20s, I would lose arguments with my girlfriend all the time. Not the one I'm with now, but when I was with this girl in my 20s. She was just really smart, and she knew how to win an argument, and her memory was impeccable. So every time we would start to talk about something, I would feel confident in what I knew, and I could pretty much, speak my mind, but she would always say things that put me in my place, and I never knew how to get out of it. And she would always say things like, you forgot. I mean, she wasn't a crazy maker. She was actually a very decent person. It's just that I didn't have very many tools back then, and we weren't communicating well. And we would get into these arguments, and I would always feel defeated. I would always feel like she, quote, won. And I would just stand there and be in this befuddled state and not know what to say or do next. But I just knew that I lost. So I started to think that maybe, and this is going to sound, I don't know, a little weird. I thought maybe I was mentally challenged. I thought I was. I literally thought I was mentally handicapped in some way, and that maybe I did have a bad memory. Maybe I couldn't really recite the truth accurately. I don't know. I just started to believe that I had a mental challenge of some sort. And I was so afraid of it. And so I resisted it for, months. And then one day I thought about it again, because I was always thinking about it. And I asked myself, well, why am I so afraid of being mentally challenged? And I came up with some answers, like maybe I'll be put in a class of people that aren't as smart as other people. And why is that a problem? Because if I'm not that smart, people will look down on me. And I started exploring it. I started diving into my fear. And I think that's important. I think you need to dive into these fears to figure out why exactly they are your fears. So I dove into it. Why do I feel so afraid of being mentally challenged or handicapped? Why am I so afraid of that? I would ask myself. And I finally came to the conclusion that I really didn't have an answer. Yeah, sure, there could be that feeling that people might look down on me, but I even asked myself, well, why is that a problem? What if people look down on me? Who cares? I mean, I started saying that. Who cares? How is that a big deal? This is the drill down technique I use when I talk about my other show. If you drill into your fears and you break them apart, you'll start to figure out that maybe you really don't have them defined at all. It's like asking yourself, well, why am I afraid if somebody yells at me? Your first answer might be, well, I don't want to be yelled at. Yeah, but why are you afraid of it? Well, because if they yell at me, they might hurt me. And then you might have to drill into that a little bit. Well, does yelling hurt? Well, no, yelling itself doesn't hurt. I guess I'd be okay, but if they yell, then they might push me around. Okay, so now we're diving into something even deeper. So you feel physically scared of this person? Your answer might be yes, or might be no. Well, maybe not this person, but when I was yelled at in the past, I was physically scared. Okay, now we're starting to find the origin of the fear. That can be helpful. Again, I talk about drilling down into the emotions, the fears in my other show, but I wanted to mention it here because sometimes we don't define our fears. Sometimes we don't drill in enough and we just walk around with a fear of something that really has no definition, no structure. And our origin is so subconscious that we just think we should be afraid. So that's the next thing, is when the fear kicks in, ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? What exactly am I really afraid of? And you can even go further and ask yourself, well, what are they holding against me? Like if somebody were to say threatening things to you, you can ask yourself, what do they have on me? What are they holding against me? Like, let's just say that you have kids and they say, well, if you do this, you're going to lose the kids forever. Or if you break up with me, you're not going to find anyone that will love you as much as I do. That's a classic, unfortunately. And I don't want you to believe that at all, but that's what they'll say. Emotionally abusive people will say things like that. And when you hear that, it can be frightening. Like, oh my God, can they really do that? Oh my God, they have something against me, so I can't do anything. I'm stuck. When you feel that way, when that fear kicks in, ask yourself if you have all the facts about what they're holding against you or what they have on you. Make sure that you have the facts. Because if you don't, you should do your research. Don't listen to the person that's abusing you. Do your own research. Find out if it's true. Can they really do that? And when you find out the truth, you'll have more information. And then maybe the fear will go away. Or maybe the truth is real. Maybe they're saying something real. But now you have tools to work with that truth instead of what you think is truth. Or some people think that, oh, this is true, so there's nothing I can do about it. But sometimes there is. Often there is. Often you can do things about it. It's just that we think that we can't. Because maybe there are circumstances that we believe are beyond our control, or we believe we don't have any options. When that happens, then yeah, it's going to feel like there's nothing we can do and we're stuck. Don't let yourself feel stuck. Do your research. Find out the real facts. If they say, you're going to be broke and homeless if you do that, and you're going to be single for the rest of your life, ask yourself, is that really true? If they're saying something stupid like that, or you're just accepting it as truth because they seem to know a lot and they seem pretty smart, just do your research. 99 times out of 100, if you're responding from a place of fear, you'll give in to that emotionally abusive behavior. So when it comes to fear, remember, fear controls the insecure. Don't let that be you. Because if they can make you insecure, like, oh my God, I'm not going to have a home, I'm not going to have any money, I'm not going to have a relationship, then you're easily controlled. So we can't just be in this state of, I have a lot to lose. We have to be in a state of, I've done my research and I know the facts. So I'm going to move on to the next thing. Let's talk about the responses you can have to crazy-making or gaslighting. I just talked about what happens inside of you and what you need to look for inside of you and how you need to respond inside of yourself so that you can understand the pattern that begins, and knowing the pattern helps you slow down what happens, because as soon as you know step 1 and step 2, you break that apart in your mind by stepping out of your own emotions and seeing what's happening, being the observer, which really helps you start to reconnect with yourself as well. Like, I can see this is happening. You're watching from a distanced or dissociated perspective, seeing this unfold and realizing, oh, this is the pattern. What's really cool about that, I mean, it's not fun at all, but what's really cool about that is that you'll find often that the pattern that begins is repeated. Like it might start with that look, or it might start with that inflection. Once you find the pattern that gets repeated, then you'll be able to catch it even sooner. So what happens when you catch it? What do you do when you do feel that drain and you're being the observer and you're going through all these steps? Here's a few things that you can do to respond to the crazy-making or the gaslighting behavior. One of the things that you can say is, I know what you're doing, so stop it. That's it. I know what you're doing, so stop it. Now, this is going to confuse the unconscious manipulator, and this is going to worry the conscious manipulator. The person who's consciously manipulating you is going to be like, uh-oh, what do they know? I'm worried. I don't want them to know what I'm doing. What does that even mean? I know what you're doing, so stop. I mean, hear my inflection. Practice that. I know what you're doing, so stop. And of course, they're going to answer, what am I doing? Or, you don't know what I'm doing. I'm not doing anything. They're going to say something like that. But you can respond by saying something along the lines of, you're trying to confuse me. Or, you're trying to make me doubt myself. So stop that right now. These are just suggestions. I'm not saying that they'll work, and I'm not saying that it won't make it worse. I'm just saying that this is a way to keep your power. These things may or may not work, but these are ways to keep your power with some people. Some people aren't going to let you. Some people want to keep their power no matter what. But doing these things is a way to keep your power if you're able to follow through with them. Pick your battles wisely, but this is one way to do it. Now, the reason I say, I know what you're doing, so stop, is because I don't want you to get into too many details. Like you can say, you're trying to confuse me or you're trying to make me doubt myself, but don't call it crazy making. Don't call it gaslighting. I think one of the mistakes, and it's probably my fault because I haven't conveyed this well enough, one of the mistakes that some victims of emotional abuse make is they will define and label what the other person is doing to them. The only problem with that, and the reason I call it is a mistake, is because sometimes the abusive person will turn it around and say, no, you're doing that to me. You're gaslighting me. You're the narcissist. That is the turnaround game. They will put you on the defense so that you have to explain yourself. I mean, it can still happen with this. The things I'm telling you today, it can absolutely happen the same way. They can say, no, you're trying to confuse me, or you're trying to make me doubt myself, so you stop. They can absolutely do that. This is why it's tricky. But you may want to try these things. I know what you're doing, so stop. So that's one of them. Now, if they don't stop, you can say something like, I see very clearly what you're doing. I can see right through it now. This may cause them, again, to feel a little self-conscious because they don't want to be caught. They want you to feel inferior and dependent on them, maybe. They need you to stay confused, and they need you to stay hurt so that you'll seek clarity and love from them, the very person abusing you. In other words, that's that trauma bonding. If you're confused and hurt, you're going to seek clarity and love from them. So they want you to stay in that cycle. But if you start becoming very confident in what you're witnessing, this is because you're now more aware, you can say things like, I now see right through your behavior. It's very clear to me now what's happening here. Now, they may ask you to explain. I still say try to avoid terms like gaslighting and crazy-making. I still say to avoid those terms so that they don't just start defining you. I like to look at actual behaviors. Like when you say, you're confusing me, they might say, well, how am I confusing you? And you can say, look, you said this, and then you turned around and said this, and then you said this. Now, it might be hard to recall that because there's often a lot of wordplay. They will just throw a lot of words at you, and they will put you in that confused state. But this brings us to another point that I want to make, which is you address every detail so that they can't continue talking and entrancing you. So if they're going on and on and on, which some manipulators will do, they'll just keep talking at you and talking at you and talking. And a lot of victims of that will just be silent and wait for them to stop talking. But the whole time, the victim is actually processing what they're saying, either to build a defense or explain themselves or tell them they're wrong. The victim is hearing all of this, just waiting for them to stop talking. But the problem with that is that because you're not stopping them, they continue to dominate the conversation. So it's important for you to stop them and get clarity on what they're saying to make sure that they explain to you what they mean. Now, that might not go over well either. Manipulators talk and talk to dominate the conversation. So they don't want somebody else dominating the conversation. They want to keep you submissive. So if you stop them, it's going to interrupt their pattern. But I recommend you do that. That pattern is what is keeping the cycle of emotional abuse going. So if you say, okay, so what you're saying is, and then you explain what they just said. So that might mean they come out with something, and then you repeat what they said. And then you ask them about what they said. Now, let me just give you an example. Let's just say that they're saying, when you took the car, I told you that I need it whenever I needed it to run out and get food, but the car wasn't there when I needed it, and I thought we had an understanding that when I was home, and it's the third Sunday of the month, and the moon is waning, that we had agreed that the car will be there, and you just wouldn't take off. And they keep going, and they keep talking at you, and they keep talking at you. You need to interrupt before it even gets that far. You need to say something like, wait, stop. So you're saying that on the third Sunday when the moon is waning, you need the car. Okay, let me write that down. That's another part of this. Let me write that down. You need the car when the moon is waning. I don't want to get this wrong. I want to make sure I get this right. I don't want to get it wrong because obviously this is what happens as we get into this argument. So I don't want to argue anymore. So let me just write this down. You need the car, third Sunday, the moon is waning. And now I have an understanding. Does this make sense? So you're going to read it back to them. This is going to be like minutia to them. It's going to be little trivial details, and they're not going to like it probably because now you're stopping their pattern when their goal with this monologue is to keep you in a submissive, suggestible, confused space so they can continue their control and their dominance over you. But if you interrupt, this is something that can happen is it stops them and they have to explain it. Now, if they have to explain it, now they have to actually face themselves. They have to stop and you ask them a question. So what you're saying is that on the third Sunday and only the third Sunday? Now you're asking detailed questions that might tick them off. I get it. It might do it. But if you don't want to be in these conversations, you want to have accuracy. You want to have clarity. And they will often not give you enough clarity or any clarity so that you can actually follow, quote, their rules. They'll not give you enough clarity. They'll just give you a bunch of words. And then you're supposed to make something out of it. But they're setting you up to fail. They're giving you a bunch of words, setting you up to fail so that they can say, I never said that, or I didn't mean that. And if you fail, then what are you going to do? You're going to try to tell them, I'm sorry, I thought you said that. Or you're going to be in this space of, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're right. I thought I was doing the right thing. Again, you're in that lower disempowered state, which you don't want to be in. So stopping the conversation, stopping them from talking to you or talking at you, and then asking for clarity on each point they make will start to cause them to realize you're actually listening and you're actually taking notes. I like the idea of taking notes. It may not work for your situation, but you take notes and then you get clarity on those notes because you want to be super clear. Not because I want you to become a rule follower. It's not about that at all. It's about making them face themselves. It's about making them actually take responsibility for what they're saying because they often don't do that. And this is one way to cause them to do that. Try to remember that the person who dominates a conversation is almost always only ever thwarted by another dominator. What that means is if you have somebody in your life that just continues to talk at you, that they are very hard to get through unless you become the dominator. This is often why emotional abuse victims need to become the person they're trying to communicate with in order to get their message across. The one who controls needs to be controlled. The one who dominates needs to be dominated in order for the scales to tip and balance. I've had people write to me and tell me they feel like they're the abusive ones. But remember, you might have to change how you communicate with them because there's no other way to communicate with them and make yourself heard and get your needs met. If you're with someone who dominates the conversation, you might have to be the dominator because that might be the only way to communicate with them. And they may reach in their toolbox and find another tool to keep you under control. But this is often how you can communicate with somebody who's in that state, is that they feel like they need to dominate. So how are you going to communicate with them? You might have to stop them, ask for clarity, and control the conversation. So they may or may not like that, but it can be very helpful if you're always in that submissive state of their dominance, then you might have to turn the tables there. It doesn't mean it's permanent. It just means it breaks the pattern. Once the pattern's broken, you may be able to communicate at a different level. And it may not happen. But the idea is to start seeing these patterns, start understanding them, and start doing your best to break them to find out if the relationship with this other person can be salvaged or improved in some way. Because sometimes the unconscious manipulator becomes conscious. And sometimes the conscious manipulator becomes empathetic. And sometimes the empathetic manipulator stops being toxic and they become more compassionate and they get in touch with their empathy. And now you can communicate in a better way. Or at least that's the ultimate goal for a lot of relationships, is to be able to get along, understand each other, have compassion, have empathy, and be careful about not hurting the other person, or at least be caring so that you're not intentionally or unintentionally hurting the other person. All right, and let me just give you one more piece of information when it comes to like writing stuff down. You want to stop them and say, okay, hold on, let me understand what you're saying. And you repeat back to them, and then you write it down if you're going to do this. And then they might get upset. That's okay, because what you're going to say at that point can be something like, you say I often misunderstand or mishear you, so I don't want that to happen again. So I'm writing it down. So give me a moment, because I want to make sure that we're on the same page. That might be a way to go as well. This will slow things down because it'll give you time to write things down. So if they're one of those talkers and you say, no, give me a second, I'm going to write this down. And don't do it sarcastically. Don't do it like you're being a jerk. You don't want to do that. I mean, you probably do want to do that, but just do it in a way like, no, I really want to understand because I know I get things wrong. You might have to play dumb for a little bit. I know I get things wrong, so let me write this down so I definitely get it right next time. But what's good about that is it does slow down the conversation. It doesn't become a dominant over a submissive. And so that's helpful too, is that you get to slow down the conversation. They get to take responsibility for what they're saying. It can't just all come out in one barrage of words. It actually is reflected on as they speak. That can be helpful. All right, I thought I had a few more, but this is actually the last one. This is something I've said in many other episodes, it's always my fallback, is saying something like, do you realize that when you do or say that, it hurts me? Do you realize that when you say that, when you say those words, it hurts me? I mean, do you know you're hurting me? They could answer, you're hurting me too. And you could say, okay, you know what? You might be right. And I want to talk about that too, but I just want to make sure that you know what you're saying is also hurting me. Because you want to hear them say yes or no. You don't want them to be vague about this. You actually want to be very clear that you feel hurt by what they're doing or saying. Because if you make it very clear that what they're doing is hurting you, and you say, do you realize when you do or say that it hurts me? And you get a yes or a no, then you have a lot of information to work with. If they say yes, then where do you stand in their life? If they say yes, I know I'm hurting you. or whatever they say that has a yes in it like that, like a yes, but then you know where you stand with them. Someone who knows they're hurting you tells you where you stand in their life. And that's important for you to know, because that's not going to change. I mean, you just have to accept that. That's not going to change. If they know you're hurting you, then they've already accepted that's who they are, and they already accepted that you're hurt, and that's okay with them. So it may not be pleasant to hear, but it's really good to know, because it helps you make decisions. But what if they say no? No, I didn't know I was hurting you. Then the follow-up is, now that you know, will you please stop doing it? And the crazy maker or the gaslighter is going to turn that around and say something else, but you want to know if they'll stop doing that. They may say something like, well, you're hurting me and this is how you do it. And again, you follow it up with, okay, you might be right. Let's talk about that too. But I want to make sure that now that you know that that particular comment hurts me, that you'll stop doing that. And they may say something like, well, I'll only stop if you stop. And you might have to ask, well, okay, so you will stop then. Only if you stop. Well, you're still not getting a yes or a no. They are setting themselves up to get away with it. They are setting themselves up so they don't have to follow that rule. And you might have to say, well, if you can't say you'll stop hurting me, then I don't know if I can be with someone who knows they're hurting me. That doesn't sound like a very nice way to live, or something like that. I'm just giving you suggestions. How you say it, what you say is going to be up to you. And it's going to be context dependent. But once you're in that position where you tell them they're hurting you and they know they're hurting you, then their next steps will tell you a lot. Yes, I know I'm hurting you. I mean, I've heard that before. Somebody said, I asked my boyfriend that, and he said, yes, I do know I'm hurting you. And she said, why? Why are you hurting me? And he said, well, it's fun. What? I mean, that's ridiculous. And she did the right thing. She said, well, I don't want to be with somebody that hurts me. I don't know if she said that to him, but I don't think she stayed with him. I think she left because she knew where she stood. She said, that's it. Obviously, there's nothing I can do about that. She said in her mind, probably. So I don't want to be with somebody who hurts me. She took a stand. She took her power back. She heard the answer to the hard question that she hoped would be answered differently. And that's all she needed. And sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes you just need to know a truth that hurts. And that truth that hurts can empower you. It may suck. It's sorry to say, it may be awful to hear, but it's better than denial. And it's better than living on the hope that someone will change, or just hoping that they'll see that they're hurting you and stop. Because if they say they know they're hurting you, then what are we doing here? We don't want to deal with that. So it's good to know. So do you realize when you say that it hurts me, or when you do that it hurts me, and now that you know, will you please stop doing it? If they say no, now you know where they stand. However, if they say yes, then you should ask them, I think you should ask them, so you'll stop saying X. You'll stop doing or saying X, whatever X is, and ask them to agree. So this really makes them responsible for their behavior. Okay, yes, now I know I'm hurting you. I didn't know that before, so I'm sorry, or whatever they say. Hopefully they apologize. I'm sorry about that. So you'll stop doing that then, and ask them point blank to answer that question. So you'll stop doing that. If they say, well, only depends on this, and or if you aren't doing that. No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm just asking if you'll stop that particular behavior. Because if you have a problem with my behavior, then we need to talk about that too. But that's a separate issue. My issue with your behavior is this. It hurts me. I just want to know that you're going to stop doing that particular thing. Because if you get them to agree, they're not going to want to agree, typically, because they want to do it again. They know it's a control mechanism and it works. But we want them to take responsibility for saying yes or no here. So asking that question, so you'll stop saying this, or you'll stop doing this? Make sure they agree. If they don't give you a congruent answer, then it's not an agreement. A congruent answer is like an absolute. Absolutely, I will not do that. Or absolutely, I will stop doing it. That's a congruent answer. You can hear it in my voice. Absolutely, I will stop doing that. I don't know if they'll follow it. They may not. They may just be lying, but you're looking for that congruent answer. An incongruent answer is, I'll stop. It depends. I might be tired one day. You don't want that answer. You shouldn't settle for that answer. I might be tired one day, so I can't really say yes or no. That's incongruent. That is not an answer that you can take home with you. That is something that you hear and you don't even know what to think about that. It gives them an out. We don't want to give them an out. We want to make sure that we get a congruent, solid answer. So again, I'm giving you these aren't necessarily solutions. They are just steps in a direction that help you unpack what's going on and break it apart a little bit, shake the foundation so that you can understand where you stand with all these things. Because if you're doing all of these little techniques and processes and the communication is still toxic or poisonous, and no matter what you do, it all fails, then there may be no hope. I don't want to say that to you, but there may be no hope if you're trying, because these are all things that should empower both of you. They really should, because if you're saying things like, do you know when you say that it hurts me? It empowers them. It's an empowering thing for them to think about that and take responsibility and say something like, I don't want to hurt you. That's terrible. I don't want to do that anymore. That's a very empowering place to be. This isn't just about arming the victim and putting the abuser out of their misery. It's not about that at all. It's about giving both of you the power to be able to communicate in a better way so that you get along. I think it's a lot easier to get along than to go through all this crazy stuff that I'm talking about. But there are crazy makers and gaslighters out there that really don't want to just get along. They just want to control. They just want to keep you confused. They just want to keep you guessing at what truth is, and they want you to depend on them to get them into a place of clarity after they've gotten you into a place of confusion. So if you stay in a relationship like that, even when they know that you know they're doing it, it doesn't end. It never ends. If everything I just said doesn't work, and they know that you know what they're doing, and they know what they're doing, it won't end. I'm being straight up with you, just telling you like it is. It won't end. So if you needed something definitive to help you make a decision in your life or take a bigger stand in your life, honor your boundaries, take care of yourself in a way that you've never done before, maybe you need to hear that. Maybe that will be helpful. I do have one more piece of advice, and this is pretty important. I almost skipped it, but I realize how important this is that the crazy maker will want you to feel crazy, of course. They want you to have a highly emotional response as well. They want you to be dramatic. They want you to be the opposite of calm and cool and collected. This is one of the bigger yet covert signs of emotional abuse that many people don't catch. It's that when you have a calm person saying that their partner, or whoever the victim of emotional abuse is overreactive and highly dramatic and emotional all the time. They'll say things like, you see what I have to put up with? How am I supposed to talk to them? They're completely irrational. They'll say things like this. The calm abuser or manipulator or controller, whatever you want to call them, is hoping to get a highly charged emotional response from their victim. So when their victim is having an emotional reaction, they can point out to other people, this is what I have to deal with. They'll purposefully make you crazy and make you look crazy while they stay calm. And then people look at the calm one and they think, wow, he or she is the rational one. He or she is the patient one. And this other person, wow, they are very difficult to live with or deal with. No wonder this person's so unhappy, is that they have to deal with this crazy person. So the crazy maker makes you crazy, points out to other people that you're crazy, and then makes them look like a shining star. And guess who they feel sorry for? Not you. They feel sorry for the person who's causing you to emotionally respond. So because this happens, because you will be labeled as crazy, it is imperative to understand that they feed off of your emotional response. They feed off your emotional drain. The abuser shows up as calm and seemingly reasonable, fooling everyone into thinking that you're the crazy one. The abuser feeds off your emotional energy, which is why they often go after emotionally connected people and empathetic people. If you're emotional, they prey on that. They need your emotion to feed. They crave it. But if you stop the pattern, when you feel yourself starting to get confused, starting to get drained, remind yourself in that moment that they are seeking to be fed by your emotional energy. So if you feel this energetic charge building up in you and it's about to come out in either tears or screaming or upset, however it's going to be expressed, this will be their fuel. But if you stop the pattern, when you feel yourself getting confused, when you feel the drain starting, and you remind yourself in that moment that they are seeking to be fed your emotional energy, you might be able to stop the cycle altogether. Remember, the confusion and the drain are the start, and you need to stop it before it starts to take you into that abuse cycle. And this might mean that you have to put the inner child away. That playful, loving, caring, generous inner child that is always with you, so you can access the protective adult inside of you. The inner adult, I guess you could call it. And you need this stoic protector to step in and have the conversation for you. What does this mean? That means if you're a highly emotional person or a highly sensitive person, it's going to be a challenge, but you need to show up in a way that is not feeding your emotional energy to them, because once it gets fed to them, they have control. They know how to use your compassion against you. They know how to use your caring, your generosity, your wants, your needs, everything against you, because they feed off your emotional energy. It's sort of like, I hate to equate it with this, dog training. When you train a dog, as they get more and more disciplined, they look at you and they stare at you and they wait for any little tiny cue of what to do next. I did this once with a dog that my wife and I had when I was married. All I would have to do is put my hand out and then put my index finger down, and he would sit down. He was that observant that he was watching for any little signal, and all I had to do was move my finger. He would watch for it like a hawk. He'd just stare at my entire body. Just anything that I would do, because I had different signals for different parts of my body. And he would sit down right away. And of course, he'd get a snack and he was happy. But this is what the abuser will do too. They are so acutely aware of your behaviors, of the inflection in your voice, your verbal and nonverbal cues, and your body language. This is the same stuff I told you to see in them. They are constantly doing it with you. A lot of them are. They're constantly aware of what you're doing, because what they do is, as you fall into any sort of emotional drain or confusion or submissive state, as they're making you feel bad about yourself, they're watching your body language and they're seeing how things play out, and they work on that and they feed off of that, and then they feed you more information to make you feel even more drained. And pretty soon you're just jello and you don't really know what to do next, and you're kind of in this stuck state. This is why the gray rock technique is so important, which I've talked about before. It's a term in narcissistic abuse, is where the abuser is trying to get an emotional response from you, but if you act like a dull gray rock and they can't get that emotional response, then all those cues they're looking for aren't there, and it confuses them. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to do gray rock in a relationship. It's usually when the relationship's over and you don't want to be emotionally activated by them after that. But you can get very stoic and not show the typical signs. I mean, if you start crying every time, they're going to look for that and they're going to feed off of that. So that inner child might have to go away for a little bit in a safe place, and that inner adult steps in and says, no, I got this. I'll take care of this. I'm not going to cry this time because I'm observant and I'm watching what's happening here, and I'm not going to let this happen anymore. I'm not going to allow this to happen anymore. So I'm going to take over. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do to protect this person that I am. And by doing that and not showing this emotional response that you normally have, you then become the calm, rational, reasonable one. And they might get a little frustrated by that. Again, they might get frustrated with anything I'm talking about today. They might get angry. They might get upset and make your life miserable. I know. But if you don't try these things, then you'll never know where you stand. And it's very important to know where you stand so that you can make the right decisions and the next best decision for all of you, for anyone involved. So I do like the idea of becoming more stoic in your responses. And this is only when you feel the drain. If you start to feel the drain coming, don't give them any cues about what's going to happen next. If you normally start to cry, if you normally start to yell back, if you normally start to just sink inward and they can see your body language shift and your shoulders go down and your head goes down, then they're going to feed off of that. So we don't want to feed them our old behavior. We might have to come up with something different that confuses them. And your stoic response might confuse them. So take anything I've said today and use it in your life or not. I just wanted to give you something to think about and perhaps some responses that you can use that might be helpful so that you can understand things better and get out of the emotional abuse cycle. I know this was a long episode. I had a lot to cover, and I hope that I was able to help you in some way. I appreciate you tuning in. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook. That is an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. It contains a 200-point checklist to help you not only pinpoint the exact behaviors causing the difficulties in your relationship, but also clearly reveal to you why you leave so many interactions feeling bad. The workbook will help you make the next best relationship decision for both of you. Use it to understand your own behavior and how they affect those you love, or use it together to reveal issues that you both need to work on. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant because you are. Thank you for joining me today. We'll talk again soon.